सेव किया था ना?
मैं सिर्फ इसलिए गया था क्योंकि उसने मुझे कॉल किया, that's it. But listen तो.
Save it for someone else.
जिंदगी में सेव करना जरूरी है, मगर जब बात पैसों की हो, सिर्फ सेविंग से काम नहीं चलेगा। इक्विटी म्यूचुअल फंड्स में इन्वेस्ट कीजिए और अपने सेविंग्स को आगे बढ़ने का मौका दीजिए।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
I'm with Pavan Verma, well-known author, diplomat, a former member of the Janata Dal Alliance, who was in fact very much part of the Mahagathbandhan in 2015 when the JDU and the RJD came together, and Rahul Verma, senior fellow at the Center for Policy Research in New Delhi and a familiar face at ThePrint. And today, of course, we are discussing what's happening in Bihar. There is no other story, I think, in India today than the return of Nitish Kumar for an unprecedented 8th time as Chief Minister of Bihar. In the last 17 years, Mr. Kumar has probably allied with every political formation, beginning with the CPI-ML. He was very much part of the BJP government until yesterday, of course. Very much he and his party, the JDU and the RJD in 2015, formed this Mahagathbandhan, which was again something that shook Bihar politics, came to power only to break it off in 2017, and we know the story ever since. So depending on your politics, you could call Mr. Nitish Kumar either Paltu Kumar or Sushasan Babu. And to explain it all, I would first like to welcome both of you gentlemen to the Print debates.
Thank you, Jyoti.
Mr. Pavan Verma, can I come to you first and ask you, for you, is this a bit of deja vu, can I say? In 2015, like I said, you were very much part of the JDU at the time, the Mahagathbandhan that was stitched together between your former party, the JDU, and the RJD. And today, both these parties are back again in action with Mr. Nitish Kumar at its helm. Your first comments.
You see, in politics, which is dynamic, not necessarily ethically so, alliances change, and there is no party better than the BJP, which knows this. I mean, the BJP had heaped abuses on Mr. Nitish Kumar, when rather courageously in 2013, he was the lone voice opposing the rise and the leadership of Mr. Narendra Modi. And he took a stand and he paid a price for it. And the BJP looked upon him as a traitor, a betrayer, a man without principles, and so on and so forth. Then the same BJP allies with him in 2017, so all of this is forgotten. The BJP allies with the PDP, forms a government. Today, the very leadership of PDP is under house arrest while the BJP is in power. Essential point I'm making is,
yes,
I can give instance after instance,
okay,
that politics change. Now in Bihar, what has happened is that the BJP, in a sense, was inviting this to happen because they seem to have, in a newfound hubris, lost the art of dealing with allies. As you can see and you know, none of the major allies are anymore with the BJP. JP Nadda publicly said that there is no space for any other party except the BJP. So the modus operandi for the BJP is to use a regional ally to come to power, then work to erode that ally, and if possible, divide it.
So is that what happened in Bihar? Is that what happened in Bihar?
Without a doubt. And I'll say to you, and very quickly, you see, Nitish ji did join the BJP in 2017. He must have had his reasons. But I know from personal experience, because I remained in the JDU till 2019, he was less than comfortable in the alliance, primarily on the BJP's policy, blatant policy of using religion to divide people and of creating a rift in society. And he had always supported a country where there is social harmony between the many religions. So he was uncomfortable. Then the BJP tried to humiliate him on a daily basis because they felt that he has been cut to size. And how was he cut to size? It was a transparently Machiavellian step, Jyoti. They used Chirag Paswan to ensure that Nitish ji gets far fewer seats than the BJP.
Okay.
So he's honestly the chief minister. But actually the BJP believes that it has come to rule on its own. And lastly was the attempt by RCP Singh as a pawn of the BJP to actually break the JD.
Okay.
As they did in Maharashtra. So a combination of factors, and Nitish Kumar is no pushover, beyond a point.
Right.
So led to what happened.
Right. Rahul Verma, the way Mr. Verma is describing this situation and how it's played itself out in Bihar, it's very much like the Chanakyan or the Machiavellian Sam Dam Dand Bhed maxim that the BJP seems to be using in Bihar. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, is it? The fact that a close aide and confidant, a former close aide and confidant, Mr. RCP Singh, was allegedly being used by the BJP to break the Janata Dal United. Now, what are your first comments on that? And how do you think Mr. Nitish Kumar is going to be able to maneuver himself back on the stage?
Thank you, Jyoti. First, a quick reaction to your point about what is wrong in it. And that depends on your lens. Whenever you are going to put the ethical lens, you can figure out right and wrong. But if you are going to put the lens of pursuit of power, then nothing is wrong in pursuit of power. Let me come back to what Mr. Pavan Verma was saying and just elaborate it further. He pointed out something very important: BJP's relationship with allies. So now, many long-term allies, Shiv Sena, Akali Dal, and JDU, have now walked out of BJP. Right. So in some ways, you have to understand the allies' relationship with BJP pre-2013 was a very, very different thing. After Prime Minister Modi's rise and BJP's expansionist impulses, BJP is, of course, going to try and consolidate its own position and not depend on allies further. Okay. You have to also remember there is no love lost between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Nitish Kumar. So this alliance, which came in 2017, was very much sort of like, there was uneasy relationship, especially as was described after BJP tried to play a long con in Bihar, right? So what BJP is trying to do in Bihar is to emerge as the single largest party. And at every step, they have a long-term game in mind. So what happens to Chirag Paswan is not going to affect BJP's game plan. It may delay things, right? And that's why they precipitated a crisis in Bihar during the 2020 elections once they figured out that unless they support Nitish Kumar in the election wholeheartedly, the alliance could lose. So you saw a turnaround between the first and second phase. So going forward, this uneasy relationship, and not just JDU, but all other allies are going to have with BJP. It's a dominant party system. And in the dominant party system, BJP is going to push for more space for itself, which is going to basically strike a uncordial relationship with most of the allies. So what Nitish Kumar did showed his survival instinct yesterday, because he is essentially trying to preempt a strike which would have happened in 24 or 25. So that's a game of chicken and mouse which is going on.
Pavanji, can I ask you about the relationship between Prime Minister Modi and Nitish Kumar? Now, you have been very close to Nitish Kumar. And like you said, you remained in the party for 2 years, even after the JDU and the BJP came together. Explain to us the relationship, not just between the two parties, but between the two leaders.
No, it has been a relationship not of respect or affection. I can say this.
Not of affection or respect.
Yeah, that's right. Because if you recall, when Narendra Modi was coming to power at the end of 2012 and until 2014, Nitish Kumar, as an important part of the NDA, had vociferously put on record his opposition to the BJP. If Mr. Narendra Modi was at its helm, he was used to the BJP of Atal Bihari Vajpayee, of Arun Jaitley as an interlocutor, of even Lal Krishna Advani. And he had serious doubts, especially on the question of Hindu majoritarianism and religious divides, which would likely follow if Narendra Modi came to power. And he opposed the BJP. He left the NDA and he fought against the BJP in the 2014 election.
Then why does he come back? Then why does he come back to the BJP in 2017 if he has issues with all these with the BJP on these fronts?
That decision for Nitish ji to leave the Mahagathbandhan and come back to the BJP, Jyoti, even I find it difficult to understand. Although Nitish ji has mentioned to me that there were compulsions, including a near impasse in the running of the Mahagathbandhan because of the relationships between the two principal parties. But it was a decision that went contrary to everything he had taken a position on publicly, vis-a-vis the RSS, vis-a-vis the BJP, and vis-a-vis the BJP's ideology.
So do you think it was something that he needed to swallow, but he could not swallow? I mean, after all, he's been with them for now so many years.
Yeah, I know that he was uncomfortable.
Okay.
But the options were limited. And he, I think, has waited for the right moment with considerable damage by now to his personal standing and prestige, although he's a towering leader still in Bihar. But there are 1.5 years, almost 2 years left for the 2024 election. And perhaps he said this is the right time and above all felt enough is enough.
So Rahul, can I ask you about this? There's less than 2 years left for the 2024 general elections. What happens in the next 2 years? How does Nitish Kumar consolidate himself and his party and the caste alignments, which is a formidable sort of an understanding that he has created?
Jyoti, we have to understand that BJP also at some level knew that Nitish Kumar will part ways, right? It's just a matter of timing. So once you played that game in 2024, one outcome was that Nitish Kumar, basically, if you're trying to squeeze someone, there would be a time that the person will basically defect. So BJP should have made this calculation that Nitish Kumar is going to defect sooner or later. Now, can Nitish Kumar revive his credibility? That's a $1 million question. Nitish Kumar does not carry the same weight or same heft he had in 2010 or 2012 or 2014. Since then, his credibility has diminished, right? Like if you keep switching parties or keep switching alliances, it creates how would now RJD trust Nitish Kumar that he may not walk back again, right?
The RJD seems to be trusting him just fine. I mean,
it's not a question of trust. When Nitish Kumar sided in 2017 to come with BJP, that was not a question of trust. In politics, basically, trust is of course one element, but a lot of things depends on convenience and how you are going to shape up power equations and other things. So he has a diminished credibility, no doubt. And this is not just because of changing alliances, but also the track record he had on governance in the first decades of 2000. That track record is no more, right? Like, think about it. In last election in 2020, the two alliances, NDA and Mahagathbandhan, came very close. So Nitish Kumar does not carry the same weight. He's no longer the same Sushashan Babu he was 5-10 years ago. But that does not mean that he's not a tall leader. That does not mean that he's not popular in Bihar. That does not mean that he cannot innovate his politics. Going forward, first in next few months, Nitish Kumar will have to basically regain some of his credibility and popularity and find a new narrative to emerge as an important pole of Bihar politics. So caste census could be one issue, right? It depends. Like there are always issues on the ground, but it depends on leaders' ability and what other players are going to do in the system to be able to regain things. Otherwise, it's basically a long game where Nitish is down under.
So, Pavanji, the question that Rahul has raised is that Nitish Kumar seems to be now back on the throne of Bihar, but with diminished credibility. Would you agree with that? And my question to you is also about this Mahagathbandhan number 2 with the RJD. I mean, the RJD's popularity in Bihar also ebbs and flows. Sometimes it's seen as a party which is able to, this dabang kind of party, which is able to sort of grab votes away from the BJP. But also, it also shies away from a lot of crime, gangsterism. So how do you think Nitish Kumar is going to be able to deal with an RJD where Tejasvi Yadav is now the leader of the party and not his father, Lalu Yadav?
No, it is going to be a challenge because the RJD does have elements who often resort to taking the law in their own hands. And it was a problem when the last time the Mahagathbandhan was formed in 2015. And it will be a problem now. All that one can say is that with the 2024 elections approaching, it would be suicidal for those who have come together at this stage to see that the government does not function effectively or falls, because their fate will be sealed on the basis of their performance. So hopefully they will learn from those past mistakes. And this time the track record will be better, but those dangers are very much alive.
But do you think they will learn from those mistakes? And do you find that the restraining hand of Lalu Yadav is missing, and that Tejasvi, how do you look at him? Is this he's a young man in his 30s? Does he have the experience? Does he have the credibility again to be able to run or to help run Bihar?
I think time will show that. Lalu Yadav ji was a grassroots leader who came up the ladder in a difficult manner after years of sangharsh and sacrifice. Tejasvi Yadav is a privileged legatee of power. But so far, I don't believe he has done anything which seriously puts a question mark on his inherent abilities to play the role of a leader. However, how he shapes up, that is something, Jyoti, we have to watch. Politics, as I said, cannot be 2 + 2 = 4.
Because the reason I ask is that Tejasvi Yadav is allegedly and rumored to be spending a lot of time in Delhi rather than in Bihar itself, going from door to door, trying to persuade people to vote for him and for his party. So if that doesn't behove too well for a revived Mahagathbandhan between the two.
You see, when Tejasvi Yadav was out of power, it was one profile. When Tejasvi Yadav fought the 2020 elections, where his party did surprisingly well, it was another Tejasvi Yadav who led the party in the absence for the first time of his father Lalu Yadav. So we have to wait and see how he matures, who his advisors are, what he condones, what he pursues, how does he control his flock, and how does, above all, the relationship between Nitish Kumar and Tejasvi Yadav unfold.
So Rahul, this clearly is not going to be a bed of roses. I mean, if you want to compare it with the Mahagathbandhan of 2015, 7 years on, how do you look at this?
first point, coalitions are always uncomfortable situation. They are never bed of roses. You form coalitions because coalitions bring you certain advantage in terms of resource pooling and vote pooling. But coalitions are also costly because it puts a ceiling on how much you can grow. But politics and politicians always operate under certain constraints. And those constraints also keep changing, right? So now, basically, those constraints are more likely to make, as Pavanji was also pointing out, for both these allies to basically work till 2024. When the Mahagathbandhan came to power in 2015, the situation has changed. Now you have a much more buoyant BJP. RJD has been fast losing on resources, and you cannot survive or win for a very long period of time in politics without resources. And being in power gives you access to all kinds of resources. So it doesn't, like, coalitions survive not because two leaders like each other or they basically, find it bed of roses, but it survives and goes on for longer when those constraints make you to stick together.
Okay. But so, Pavanji, the question is that, so Nitish Kumar, now Chief Minister again of Bihar, do you think that this was really the last straw? You said earlier that RCP Singh, his former aide and confidant, was trying to break the party, was trying to break Nitish Kumar's party, his own party in a sense. But so essentially what Nitish did was to, before his party broke up, and so he was basically trying to defend himself in a sense.
You see, you can say many things about Nitish Kumar, but you can't say that he is unintelligent. He may not react immediately or emotionally, but he internalizes what happened. And he took very seriously the organized attempt by the BJP in 2020 through the use of Chirag Paswan to cut him down to size, so that the BJP could retain its hegemony in the NDA alliance. Mm-hmm. He has spoken to me about it, and it is an open secret in Bihar what happened. Chirag used to call himself the Hanuman of Narendra Modi. And it was really ironical that he was being used by the BJP against another alliance partner within the same NDA. And that is something that Nitish Kumar understood. And from there, he understood the larger game plan of the BJP, which was to ultimately reduce his credibility, his size, his strength, his reach, his political standing, so that it reaches a point where by, say, 2024, or after that, the BJP can dump him and try and fulfill its one remaining ambition in Bihar, which is to form a government on its own, which it has never done in the past. So Nitish ji knew what the game was, what was being planned. And the final straw, as I said, is when you have, as he must have, evidence of, again, an organized attempt to break the JDU, soon after what happened in Maharashtra with the Shiv Sena. Nitish ji drew the right lessons.
But he spoke to you about this earlier when you were in the party together with him?
No, he was aware about the use of Chirag Paswan by the BJP. He was fully aware and he was very bitter about it.
But it still took him 5 years to break. I mean, 2017, when he joined the BJP, and of course the elections were only in 2020. It's still taken him, yeah, but even so, it's taken him 5 years in the BJP to understand what the BJP is about.
So maybe he delayed matters for matters of expediency, or maybe he was waiting for the right time when all the constituents of an alternative alliance are in place. I really don't know, but I think he was literally being forced towards that step.
Okay. Rahul, explain the caste alignments in Bihar for the Prince viewers. You have the Mahadalits, you have the extreme backward castes. You have, of course, the women are a big voter constituency. And along with the traditional caste alignments, explain to us how Nitish Kumar was able to consolidate his hold by bringing these caste alignments together.
Okay, so let me basically make one point and add to what Pavanji was saying. Don't view these things as right or wrong unless you want to use the ethical lens. It's not that Nitish Kumar didn't try to get back at Chirag Paswan, right? So he broke Chirag Paswan's party, and I completely agree with him. Like Nitish Kumar has a 50-year worth of experience in politics. Once he senses what the game is being played, he is going to get his own sweet revenge, and he got that from Chirag Paswan. And so it's not that only BJP tries to upend things. All politicians who are in the pursuit of power will keep playing these games to their end. See, Nitish Kumar basically built his. So he it's surprising that, and that's both his strength and weakness, that the caste which he comes from is Kurmi, just 4 or 5% of Bihar's population, right? So it gives him an advantage to reach out to many other smaller caste groups or dominant caste groups, such as RJD is a party of Yadavs and Muslims. BJP is largely backed by upper caste. Nitish Kumar, what he has done in last 20 years, has stitched a coalition of extremely backward caste, so smaller OBC caste. He also divided the Dalit community into 2 categories of Paswan, which largely votes for the Chirag Paswan or Lok Janshakti Party, and then other communities, right? And so his coalition is largely EBC, Mahadalits, and a segment of voters cutting across the caste divide. Okay. So what is his strength is also his weakness, that he has not been able to basically bring the dominant caste into his own coalition. And so while he's indispensable to politics of Bihar, that without Nitish Kumar, it's difficult to form a government, it's also his weakness that he cannot alone basically contest and win. He has tried doing that and failed.
Pavanji, the last question to you, which is that as Nitish Kumar sits on the throne of Bihar once again as chief minister, again for the 8th time, how do you look at him? Do you think that he is a Paltu Kumar, as a lot of people are saying, shifting from one party to the other, or is he a man of good governance, Sushasan Babu?
I agree with Rahul. It depends what lens you look at what has happened. It's the ethical lens.
How do you look at it?
I see it as the manner in which in dynamic politics you change alliance partners. And no party has been above it, as Rahul put it, in the pursuit of power. But one thing I'll say, when I resigned from the Foreign Service in 2012 to join, Nitish Kumar was a man of great potential. He was seen as a possible prime ministerial face, a man of impeccable personal integrity, of great administrative acumen, from the Hindi heartbelt, and over the years, anti-incumbency works. And so, in a sense, there is a bit of fatigue and ennui with the same names in Bihar politics. But still, I would say he has the potential, although he has never spoken about it, to galvanize the opposition and play a role in organizing it in a more coherent pan-Indian way in the lead up to the 2024 elections.
Do you think so? Do you think that he could be prime minister in the 2024 elections? Or he could be a prime ministerial candidate, let me say that.
No, I think that is really, and this is not a diplomatic answer, far too premature to ask. A lot depends on how this government stabilizes. A lot depends on his own overt actions of whether he even wants to pursue that goal, dealing with other opposition leaders, building a consensus, a common minimum program, and so on and so forth. I mean, it's really hard work.
Right.
So we have to see. It's too early, Jyoti, to say.
Okay. Rahul, the last question to you is, so actually the same question as I asked Pavan. Do you think that Nitish Kumar can consolidate the opposition? Do you think that they can put up a united front for the 2024 elections? And my second question is that the BJP seemed really bitter 24 hours ago when Nitish Kumar walked out and basically set the cat among the pigeons. I mean, this kind of bitterness you don't see in the BJP this publicly. What do you think happened?
The answer to first question would be same as what Pavanji said. We'll have to actually wait and watch and what Nitish Kumar's overt ambitions are going to be. So in some ways, the answer is yes and no. Yes, in a way, if he manages to consolidate, if he sends signal of becoming the opposition's candidate, I think he carries both the heft and the weight where he could be taken seriously. No, because there are going to be many players who can bring similar strength.
Right.
And I don't know why anyone would allow the other person to walk away with the glory. Also, no, because Nitish Kumar or any player is not going to make a serious move to become the opposition's prime ministerial candidate unless they think that there is a good chance of them becoming a candidate. No one will basically leave the chief minister's chair to become a Pradhan Mantri ka ummidwar unless they think that there is a serious chance of becoming Pradhan Mantri.
Okay.
The answer to your second question, which is I don't think there is a setback to BJP's plan. So bitterness is neither surprising nor unusual, because you would have seen a similar kind of bitterness in Maharashtra or anywhere these alliances break up. You always use the word of all parties basically in their rhetoric use very similar kinds of words. So I wouldn't take these things very seriously. That's part and parcel of breaking and coming up of alliances.
Do you agree, Pavanji, that you don't need to take this very seriously, and that the BJP was probably not surprised at how it unfolded?
The BJP is particularly bitter because it was not expecting it to happen. They thought they had Nitish Kumar where they wanted him to be. But the improbable happened. And so the BJP is naturally using every argument in the book to justify their own behavior and vilify Nitish Kumar. It's, as Rahul said, par for the course.
Right then, on this note, we'll have to leave it there. But thank you so much, Pavan Verma and Rahul Verma, for joining me on the print debates and discussing Bihar. Of course, we'll be watching the situation very closely. But for now, thank you both so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.